In Chicago, I sat alone at my kitchen table, staring at the untouched envelope, feeling like an outsider in my own family. It was a cold evening in early March when I found out. I had been expecting the invitation for weeks, even months. After all, Thomas, my son, my only son, was getting married. I had raised him on my own, working long hours in the construction business to provide for him after his mother passed. We'd been through so much together. Yet, here I was, a 65-year-old man with graying hair and stiff joints, staring at a blank space on the wall where I thought the invitation should be. When I received a call from Thomas that morning, my heart leaped. I thought, this is it. The call to tell me when to show up for his wedding, where it will be, what I need to wear. Instead, his words sent a chill through me. Dad, I wanted to tell you personally, the wedding's coming up soon. But I'm afraid you won't be invited. I don't know why I didn't speak immediately. I should have said something, asked him why, demanded an explanation, but I couldn't find my voice. It was as if he had punched the air out of my chest. How could he say that? After everything we'd been through, after everything I'd sacrificed. Thomas, what do you mean? I asked, though I had a sinking feeling in my gut that the answer wasn't going to be one I liked. It's complicated. Dad, he replied, his voice hesitant, unsure. I hope you understand. It's just, well, I'm doing this for my future, and for your future. The words came out in a rough, low growl. What about your past? Thomas, what about me? I could hear him sigh. There was a long pause. I knew he was trying to figure out how to make this sound better. But how could he? There was no way to sugarcoat something like this. I just don't think it's the right time. Dad, I'm sorry. I really am. We'll talk later, okay? And with that, he hung up. I sat there for a long while, the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the silent void at the other end. It wasn't a mistake. He had deliberately excluded me. My only son, the boy I raised with my own hands, had turned his back on me. I couldn't breathe. After the shock settled, anger began to simmer beneath my skin. How could he do this to me? What had I done wrong? Had I not worked hard enough? Had I not been there enough for him? My mind raced through every possible explanation, none of them making any sense. I had always been there for him, even when I was struggling to keep the bills paid, even when I was tired beyond belief. I made sure he had everything he needed, and this is how he repaid me. I stood up from the table, gripping the back of the chair so hard my knuckles turned white. There was no way I could let this go. There had to be a reason, something hidden behind this coldness, this betrayal. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, the silence in the house deafening. I couldn't stop thinking about Thomas, about what he might be hiding. No father should ever have to endure this kind of rejection. But the question gnawed at me. Why? Why had he done this? The next day I went to his apartment. Maybe if I confronted him in person, he'd open up. Maybe he'd see the hurt in my eyes and realize what he was doing. I rang the doorbell, my heart pounding. I knew it wasn't going to be easy, but I had to face him. When the door opened, Thomas was standing there, dressed in a simple shirt and jeans. His face was tense, his jaw clenched, as though he was bracing for an argument. I didn't even wait for him to speak. I pushed past him into the apartment. What is this, Thomas? I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. Why wasn't I invited? What's going on? He closed the door behind me, his eyes darting nervously. Dad, please, can we talk about this later? I don't want to argue. No, I said, my voice rising. This is my son's wedding. My wedding was the most important day of my life. You're telling me I don't matter? His face faltered for a moment, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of guilt. But then it disappeared just as quickly, replaced by something colder, something I hadn't seen in him before. I said it's complicated, he repeated, his tone more final now. I'm not getting into it with you. It's my decision. I couldn't take it anymore. I stormed out of the apartment, slamming the door behind me, and stood outside on the street for what felt like hours. I wasn't going to give up on this. I was going to find out what was really going on, whether Thomas liked it or not. There was something deeper here, something he wasn't telling me. In Chicago, I dove headfirst into the mystery of my son's betrayal, not knowing where it would lead, but certain that the truth was something I had to uncover. The days after my confrontation with Thomas were a blur of frustration and confusion. I had never seen him like this, so distant, so cold. There were always disagreements between us, of course. As a father, I'd made mistakes. We all do. but I never imagined it would come to this, a total exclusion from one of the most important days of his life. After our heated exchange, I couldn't focus on anything. I kept replaying the conversation in my mind, trying to find a piece of the puzzle that made sense. What was I missing? What was it that I didn't know? I started small texting some of the people I knew Thomas had been in contact with, old friends of his, colleagues from work, even a few of his fiancée's relatives, who I had met at family gatherings in the past. I tried to keep things casual at first, not wanting to come off as desperate, but the truth was, why I was desperate. I had to understand why he had chosen to shut me out. The first person I contacted was Marie, one of Thomas's childhood friends. I remembered her as a sweet, earnest girl when they were younger, always the voice of reason, the one who could get him to think things through. She still lived in the area, working as a teacher. When I reached her on the phone, she sounded pleasant, though I could sense a slight hesitation in her tone when she heard my voice. "Mr. Weber, it's been so long," she said. "How are you?" "I'm fine, Marie," I replied, keeping my voice as neutral as I could manage. "But I'm afraid I'm not calling just to catch up. I need to ask you something about Thomas." "Oh," she hesitated, and I could tell she wasn't sure whether to continue. "What's going on? Has something happened between Thomas and me?" I asked bluntly. I wasn't invited to his wedding, Mary, and I can't figure out why." There was a long silence on the other end, and I could almost hear the gears turning in her head as she processed my question. I don't know if I should be the one to please," I cut in. "I need to know. I'm his father. I'm entitled to know why I've been left out." She sighed, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Mr. Weber, I think you should talk to Thomas about this." "I don't want to get in the middle of it, Marie," I said, a little more firmly. "If you know something, if you've heard anything, please, I need to know what's going on." I could hear her breath catch. Finally, she spoke, her words measured. "I don't want to say too much, but there's something Thomas is hiding, something about his fiancée. It's not what you think, though." My heart skipped a beat. Something about his fiancée. What could that possibly mean? "Can you be more specific?" I pressed. "I'm not sure what exactly is going on," she continued, her tone now almost apologetic. "But I've heard whispers. It's been going on for a while, and it's really complicated. Thomas hasn't been himself lately, not since he started dating her. I think he's caught up in something that he doesn't know how to get out of." Her words hung in the air like a heavy cloud. I didn't understand it. What was he involved in? I had never seen him act this way before. He was always so driven, so grounded. What had changed? "Marie," I said quietly, my mind racing, "you're not telling me everything. What's really going on?" She paused for a long moment, then sighed. "I'm sorry, Mr. Weber. I can't say any more. You'll have to talk to him. But just know there's more to this than you realize." The line went dead, and I sat there, staring at the phone, unable to make sense of anything. There was something dark, something hidden in my son's life that he wasn't telling me, and it involved his fiancée. I had no choice now. I had to dig deeper. I went to the apartment again, this time more determined than ever to get to the truth. But when I rang the bell, there was no answer. I knocked several times, but no one came to the door. I couldn't believe it. Was he avoiding me now, too? Frustrated, I turned to another source. A few days earlier, I had heard my son mention a lawyer he'd been working with, a man named Leonard Walsh. Leonard had helped Thomas with some legal matters related to his business, and had even handled some of the paperwork for the wedding. I had never met him, but it was worth a shot. If anyone knew what was really going on, it would be someone involved in the wedding's arrangements. I called the law firm where Leonard worked and asked to speak with him. After a brief hold, I was connected. "Mr. Weber," he said, his voice smooth and professional. "How can I help you today?" "Mr. Walsh, I'm Michael Weber," I began, my voice controlled. "I'm calling because I need some answers about my son's wedding. Specifically, why I wasn't invited." There was a pause on the other end. I could tell he was trying to gauge my tone, trying to decide how much to reveal. "Mr. Weber, I'm afraid that's not something I'm in a position to discuss," Leonard replied, his voice careful. "Come on," I urged. "I'm his father. I deserve to know what's going on. Is there something about the wedding I should know? Is Thomas in trouble?" Leonard hesitated again. "I can't speak to that, sir. I strongly recommend you speak directly with Thomas. He's the one who made the decisions." "I've tried," I said, frustration creeping into my voice, "but he's stonewalling me, and if I don't get answers soon, I swear, I'll go to someone else." "Mr. Weber, I truly understand your concerns," Leonard said, his voice softening slightly. "But I really must insist you speak to Thomas." The call ended shortly after that, but something in Leonard's voice unsettled me. He knew something. I could feel it. In Chicago, I found myself turning to old connections, hoping that someone would shed light on my son's mystery. But what I discovered only deepened the lies. The days after my call with Leonard Walsh felt like a slow descent into an abyss. No matter where I turned, every lead seemed to dry up before it could offer any real answers. My son Thomas had built walls around himself that I couldn't break through. His fiancée Heather, whom I'd only met a handful of times, remained a mystery. And each time I tried to confront Thomas directly, he shut me out even further, his coldness growing like an insurmountable barrier between us. The more I thought about it, the more I realized there was someone I hadn't reached out to yet. Brad. Brad Carson was an old friend of mine. We had known each other since our younger years, back when I had just started my business. He was an accountant, sharp as a tack, and we had stayed in touch over the years, even if our interactions had grown fewer as time went on. Still, he knew me well, and he knew Thomas, too. If anyone had any information, Brad would be the one. I hesitated before I made the call. The conversation with Leonard had left me with a sick feeling in my stomach. I didn't know if I wanted to know more, or if I was already drowning in too many secrets. But my anger at being excluded from my son's wedding overpowered that doubt. I had to get to the truth, even if it meant uncovering something I wasn't ready for. When Brad picked up the phone, his familiar voice sounded like a small comfort in the midst of everything. "Michael, my friend, been a while, huh? How you been?" he said, the cheer in his tone doing little to ease the unease in my chest. "I've been better," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Listen, Brad, I need to talk to you about something important." I could sense the change in his tone almost immediately. "What's going on, Mike?" "It's about Thomas," I said, exhaling deeply. "He's getting married, but I wasn't invited. I've tried talking to him, but he's stonewalling me. I need to know why, and I think you might know something about it." There was a long pause. I could hear the slight rustling of papers in the background as Brad processed my words. "Michael, I don't know if I'm the right person to," he started, but I cut him off. "Brad, please. I've known you for too long to hear you dance around it. What's going on with Thomas? What's he not telling me?" "I'm not sure you're gonna like what you hear," he said softly, as if he were trying to warn me. "But if you're really asking, all right, here it goes. There's something about Heather that Thomas isn't telling you." The way he said it made my blood run cold. My heart sank into my stomach. "What do you mean? What about her?" Brad sighed. "Look, Mike, I don't know all the details. I'm not directly involved in this stuff. But from what I've heard, Thomas isn't the only one keeping secrets. Heather has some issues in her past that might not exactly be ideal for your family." "What kind of issues?" I demanded, my patience thinning. "If you know something, Brad, tell me. I need to know." There was another pause, longer this time. I could hear him debating whether or not to continue. Finally, he spoke again, his voice lower than before. "All right, I'll give you what I know, but understand, this is all second-hand. I heard it from a guy who knows Heather's cousin. Apparently, Heather's family has some pretty unsavory ties. There are rumors, whispers about some illegal activities, shady deals, things that go back a long time. I don't know specifics, but it's enough to make people uncomfortable." I froze, the words barely sinking in. Illegal activities, shady deals. This was more than I had bargained for. My son, the boy I had raised, was about to marry a woman with a history like that. I couldn't believe it. "What kind of illegal activities?" I asked, though I was afraid of the answer. Brad hesitated again. "Like I said, I don't know the full story. It's all rumors, Mike. But some people are saying that Heather's father was involved in some sort of financial fraud years ago, bank schemes, embezzlement, that kind of thing. I've heard whispers about money laundering too, but I can't confirm any of that." "Jesus Christ," I muttered under my breath. This was too much to process. "So, you're telling me my son is about to marry a woman with a criminal past and he's hiding it from me?" "I'm not saying that, Mike," Brad responded quickly. "But I can't deny the fact that there's a lot more going on here than you realize. It's been kept under wraps. I think Thomas is protecting her, maybe even from himself. But if you really want to understand why he's shutting you out, you need to look at Heather's past. The silence stretched between us, thick with the weight of his words. I didn't know how to respond. How could my son, my flesh and blood, be involved in something like this? I had always prided myself on raising him right. And now this. What kind of future was he walking into? Brad, do you know if anyone else knows about this? Has anyone else in the family found out? I asked, desperate for more information. I'm not sure, Brad replied cautiously, but I do know one thing. Thomas is in too deep to back out now. This wedding is happening, no matter what. I don't think he'll ever come to terms with the truth, and he's certainly not going to tell you if you keep pressing him. I swallowed hard, my mind racing. So much had been hidden from me, so many questions had gone unanswered, and now, I felt like the more I uncovered, the darker the story became. What do I do, Brad? I asked, my voice shaking for the first time. How do I fix this? How do I protect my son from making the biggest mistake of his life? Brad's voice softened, a hint of sympathy creeping through. I don't have the answers, Mike, but I do know that you've got to get to the bottom of this before it's too late. If you can, talk to Heather, see what she's hiding. Only then will you be able to reach Thomas. The call ended shortly after that, leaving me standing in my living room, overwhelmed by everything I had learned. It wasn't just the wedding anymore. It was my son's future, his life at stake. And as much as I hated to admit it, I couldn't let him make this mistake without knowing the truth. I didn't know what I expected from Heather when I walked up to her apartment building that evening. I wasn't even sure if I was ready to hear the answers she might give me. But what I did know was that I had to confront her. My son's future, his happiness, and maybe even his safety depended on it. If what Brad had said was true, then I couldn't just stand by and watch as my son walked into a marriage built on secrets and lies. I had always believed that, in the end, a father's instincts were worth something, that if you cared enough about your child, you could help them see the truth. But as I walked towards Heather's apartment, I started to wonder if maybe I had misjudged this whole situation. What if Thomas didn't want to be helped? What if he was so deep in this that no amount of truth would snap him out of it? I rang the doorbell to her apartment and stood there, my heart pounding in my chest. It was late, almost 9 p.m., but I knew she would be home. She always worked late hours at the art gallery, where she was employed as a curator. I had never known much about her. She was a quiet, reserved woman, beautiful in a way that was almost too perfect, like she had been carefully sculpted to fit a certain image, and that, in itself, had always made me wary. The door opened after a moment, and there she stood, framed in the doorway. She looked startled to see me, her eyes widening slightly, but she quickly masked it with a polite smile. "Mr. Weber," she said softly, her tone almost too calm. "This is a surprise. Can I help you with something?" I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I could feel my temper rising, but I held it in check. This wasn't about being polite, it was about finding the truth. "I need to talk to you." "Heather," I said, my voice steady but firm. "I need to know what's really going on with this wedding. Why are you hiding things from me and from Thomas?" Her face faltered for just a second before she composed herself. She stepped back, motioning for me to come inside. "All right, if you really want to talk, we can do that," she said, her voice still soft but now laced with a hint of tension. I stepped inside, and she closed the door behind me. The apartment was as pristine as I expected, tasteful, almost minimalist in its decor, everything in its place. It wasn't the kind of home I would have expected someone with a murky past to inhabit, but looks could be deceiving. I had learned that the hard way. We both sat down in the living room, the silence between us growing thicker by the second. She didn't offer me tea or ask me to sit down in a friendly way. She was all business now, just like me. "Why wasn't I invited to the wedding, Heather?" I asked, cutting straight to the point. "I've tried talking to Thomas, but he's refusing to tell me anything. And now I find out there's more to you than I ever knew. What are you hiding?" She didn't immediately respond. Instead, she shifted in her seat, avoiding my eyes. There was a flicker of something in her gaze, guilt, fear, or maybe something darker, but it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. "I don't know what Thomas has told you, but whatever it is, it's not what you think," she said finally, her voice even but shaky. "I never meant for things to get this complicated." "I don't care about complications, Heather," I said, leaning forward slightly. "I care about the truth. If you've been hiding something from Thomas, something that could hurt him, then I need to know." She opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it again, as if weighing her words carefully. After a long pause, she finally spoke again. her tone low. "Thomas doesn't know everything about my past," she said, her eyes now meeting mine for the first time. "And I never wanted him to, but I suppose it's time someone told you. You have a right to know." She took a deep breath, as if bracing herself for the weight of her next words, and when she spoke, the air in the room seemed to grow heavier. "My father was involved in some very unsavory things," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Financial fraud, money laundering, and, worse, he's been under investigation by the authorities for years. But we've always kept it quiet, kept him out of the spotlight, made sure nobody found out. My mother and I tried to protect him. I tried to protect myself, but it's never been easy." I sat there in stunned silence. This was worse than I had imagined. I had known there were rumors, but hearing her say it so plainly made it all too real. Heather wasn't just a woman with a questionable past. She was part of a family tangled in criminal activity, and that would inevitably have an effect on Thomas. "I don't understand," I said slowly, my mind trying to process what she was saying. "If you knew all of this, why would you let Thomas marry you? Why would you let him get involved with someone like you?" Her eyes flickered with something hurt, maybe, or shame. "I didn't want to drag him into it. I thought I could keep him away from all of this. I thought I could make it work, that we could have a future without the past following us. But I'm scared, Michael. I'm scared of what will happen when people find out. My father, his dealings are dangerous. There are people who would hurt us if they knew we were trying to walk away from it." I could see the fear in her eyes now, the rawness that I hadn't expected. For a moment, I almost felt pity for her, but the anger in me didn't subside. My son was about to marry into this mess, and I couldn't allow it. "You should have told him," I said, my voice hardening again. "You should have told him before you let him get so involved with you. He has a right to know what he's marrying into, and I'm not going to let him walk into a life filled with lies." She didn't argue. Instead, she lowered her gaze, her lips trembling slightly. "I know," she whispered. "I know, but it's too late now. The wedding is set, and Thomas is too far in to back out." I stood up abruptly, my mind spinning with everything I had just learned. Heather's confession had changed everything. It wasn't just about her anymore, it was about my son. I couldn't let Thomas make the biggest mistake of his life without knowing the truth. "I'll talk to Thomas," I said, my voice grim. "And when I do, I'll make sure he understands exactly what he's getting into." I turned to leave, but before I reached the door, Heather's voice stopped me. "Please," she said quietly, "don't tell him everything. He won't be able to handle it." I paused, then looked back at her, my expression hard. "It's not up to you, Heather. It's up to Thomas to decide what kind of life he wants, and I'm going to make sure he knows the truth." With that, I walked out, leaving her standing there, the weight of her own secrets bearing down on her. I had spent days wrestling with what I had learned. Heather's confession was like a bombshell, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized I couldn't let my son walk into a marriage with a woman whose family was wrapped up in criminal dealings. It wasn't just about family secrets anymore. It was about his future, his safety. I wasn't going to let him make the mistake of marrying into that kind of danger without knowing the full extent of it, but I also knew this wasn't going to be easy. If I thought Thomas was avoiding me before, this was going to make it even harder. My son had built a life around the idea of independence, of doing things his way. I had always respected that, even if it meant we didn't always see eye. But this was different. I called him repeatedly over the course of 2 days. Each time he ignored my calls. I left voicemails, hoping something would break through. But when he didn't respond, I knew it was time to take matters into my own hands. I wasn't going to let him shut me out forever. I went to his apartment. I stood in front of the building for what felt like hours, trying to steady myself. But the anger and the worry gnawed at me. I couldn't understand how he could still be so distant, so cold. How had we gone from being close to this? The last time we'd had a real conversation was over a year ago. I knew he was busy with work and preparing for the wedding, but there had to be more to it than that. Finally, I walked inside the building and up the stairs to his floor. The door to his apartment was slightly ajar, and I could hear voices from inside. He was home. I knocked sharply, the sound echoing down the quiet hallway. When he didn't answer immediately, I knocked again, louder this time. This had gone on long enough. The door creaked open, and there he was, my son, standing in front of me, his expression unreadable. He looked different though, tired, maybe. His usual confident posture was gone, replaced with something guarded. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "Dad," he said, finally breaking the silence, but there was no warmth in his voice, no acknowledgement of the man who had raised him. "Thomas, we need to talk," I said, my voice sharp, but not angry. I wasn't going to let this become another fight. This was bigger than that. "About what?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. He was still avoiding my eyes, and that hurt more than anything else. "I know about Heather's past," I said, the words hanging heavy in the air between us. "I know about her father, and I know you've been keeping it from me." He froze, his face going pale. For the first time in months, he actually seemed like the boy I used to know, vulnerable, scared. I could see the wheels turning in his mind, trying to decide what to say. "Dad, I don't know what you've heard, but it's not what you think," he said, his voice cracking slightly. I could tell he was trying to hold it together, but the tension was palpable. "No, Thomas," I said, my voice hardening. "It's exactly what I think. Your fiancé's father is a criminal. He's involved in money laundering, fraud, and worse. And you're about to marry her without knowing everything, without even considering the danger it could bring." His eyes widened in shock, but quickly, that familiar wall of defense went up. He crossed his arms over his chest, his jaw tightening. "You don't know everything, Dad," he said, his tone dismissive. "You're just assuming. I'm not a child anymore. I'm capable of making my own decisions." "And what decisions are those, Thomas?" I shot back, frustration bubbling over. "You're going to marry a woman who's hiding this kind of past. You think that won't affect you, your business, our family. This isn't just about her. It's about the people she's connected to, the people who will come after her if they find out she's with you." "I don't care about her father's past," he snapped. "I love her. She's the woman I want to marry. And if you can't understand that, then maybe you're the one who's lost." His words stung, but I knew he didn't mean them. I'd never seen him like this before. Thomas had always been so careful, so thoughtful. To see him so blinded by love or by something else hurt more than I could express. "Thomas," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "this isn't about her. This is about you. You're my son. And I'm telling you, as your father, you're making a mistake. There are people who will use you to get to her. People who won't care about you or your future. You have to stop and think." He shook his head, his expression hardening. "I don't need you to protect me anymore, Dad. I'm capable of handling this on my own. You think you can just walk into this marriage without consequences?" I pressed. "What happens when they come after you? When your business is compromised? When Heather's past catches up to you? What then, Thomas?" He didn't answer, but the silence between us spoke volumes. I could see the doubt flicker in his eyes, the uncertainty that had always been there, lurking just beneath the surface. But he quickly masked it, turning away from me. "I've made my decision," he said, his voice quieter now, almost resigned. "I'm marrying Heather. Nothing you say is going to change that." I stood there for a moment, the weight of his words pressing down on me. This was the moment. I could push harder, force him to see reason, but I knew it would only drive him further away. I had to let go, let him make his own choice, even if it meant watching him make the biggest mistake of his life. But I wasn't going to give up, not completely. I would find a way to stop this, even if it meant going behind his back. I couldn't let him marry Heather without understanding the full truth. "I'm not going to let this happen, Thomas," I said quietly, more to myself than to him. "Not while there's still time." He turned his back to me, the door half open. "You don't have a choice," he said coldly. "It's already done." I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. I turned and walked away, my heart heavy, my mind already racing with the next steps. The stakes had never been higher. The conversation with Thomas had been a turning point, but not in the way I had hoped. He was resolute, almost defiant in his choice. He wasn't going to listen to me, not now, not ever. As I walked away from his apartment, the weight of everything he had said pressed down on me. My son, my flesh and blood, was determined to marry a woman whose past was filled with darkness, with secrets that could tear his life apart. I had tried everything, every reasonable approach I knew, and still, he wouldn't listen. The truth, the one thing I thought would make him see sense, didn't matter to him. He loved her, and that, I realized, was his blind spot. His feelings for Heather overshadowed everything else. But I wasn't going to give up. There had to be a way to make him see the truth, a way to stop this wedding before it was too late. And then, as I stood outside his building, my mind raced with an idea, a dangerous one I had never considered before. But desperate times called for desperate measures. I had learned from Brad that Heather's father had connections, dangerous ones, and those connections were the key. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. If I couldn't stop Thomas directly, maybe I could disrupt the wedding in another way. If Heather's past came to light, it would force Thomas to confront the truth. He couldn't marry her if the world knew what she was hiding. He might be angry with me for a while, but in the long run, I knew he would thank me. I made up my mind. I had to find out everything I could about her father, his connections, his dealings, and most importantly, his enemies. The more I knew about the danger Heather's family was involved in, the better equipped I'd be to stop the wedding. It wasn't a pretty plan, but it was the only option left, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of resolve. The next day, I set to work. I knew from my past connections that the world Heather's father operated in was filled with shadowy figures, people who wouldn't hesitate to do whatever it took to protect their interests. But I also knew that those people were vulnerable to exposure. Every criminal has a secret, a crack in their facade, and if I could find it, I could use it. I reached out to an old contact from my days in the business, Manny Delgado. Manny wasn't exactly someone I would have called a friend, but he was a man who knew people, a man who could dig up information that others couldn't. I wasn't proud of the connections I had, but in moments like this, you learn to use whatever resources are at your disposal. Manny picked up on the second ring. "Mike," he said gruffly, "it's been a while. What can I do for you?" "I need information," I said without preamble, "about a man named Vince Harrington." There was a long pause. "You're asking about Vince Harrington," Manny said, a bit too quietly. "You sure you want to go down that road?" "Yeah," I replied, not hesitating. "I need everything you've got. It's important." He exhaled sharply on the other end of the line. All right. I can dig around for you, but this won't come cheap. You know that, right?" "I'll pay whatever it takes," I said, feeling the weight of the situation press down on me. "Just get me the information." "Give me a few days," Manny said before hanging up. I spent the rest of the day in a haze, my thoughts swirling. Part of me knew I was crossing a line, doing something I'd never thought I'd do. I had always tried to play things by the book, to do the right thing, even when it wasn't easy. But when it came to protecting my son, when it came to saving him from a future that was already poisoned by lies, I didn't care about the rules anymore. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept going over the same scenarios. If the truth about Heather's father came out, would Thomas still marry her? Would he believe me, or would he hate me for exposing the ugly side of his fiancée's family? I had no way of knowing, but I had to take that risk. The next day, Manny called back. I picked up the phone with a sense of urgency. "I've got what you asked for," Manny said, his voice grim. "It's worse than you think, Mike." My stomach twisted. "What do you mean?" "Merrill and Harrington were more than just business partners," Manny continued. "They were involved in some serious criminal activity. You were right about the money laundering, but there's more. Word on the street is that they were moving drugs, laundering cash for international syndicates. But here's the kicker. The feds were about to close in on them. Harrington was about to be arrested when he disappeared. No one knows where he is, but it's safe to say he's in hiding." I felt a cold chill crawl up my spine. The deeper I dug into Heather's father's past, the darker it became. "Are you telling me he's on the run?" "That's right," Manny replied. "And the worst part, Heather's mother and father were both involved in some kind of protection racket. They used Heather as a way to keep things clean at her into high society. Make sure she didn't have a criminal record. She was part of the plan to keep the family image intact." Everything was starting to make sense. Heather wasn't just trying to hide her father's past, she was trying to hide herself. She had been groomed to be the perfect cover, the innocent face of a criminal empire. And now, my son was about to marry Harry, hung up with Manny, my thoughts racing. I now had the ammunition I needed. If Heather's father was in hiding, running from the law, then this wedding could never happen. I didn't care about the consequences anymore. I had to protect my son. That night, I made a decision. I would go to the authorities with what I had learned. The police needed to know what was going on, and I had to make sure they acted before it was too late. But as I lay awake, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that maybe, just maybe, Thomas would never forgive me for what I was about to do. The next few days were a blur. I had gone to the authorities, shared everything I had uncovered about Heather's father and his criminal past. I didn't have all the details, but the information I did provide was enough for them to start investigating. I couldn't afford to wait any longer. This was the only way to stop the wedding and to save my son from a future he couldn't even see the night before the wedding. I found myself pacing in my living room. I was filled with a mix of anxiety and guilt. I had done the right thing, hadn't I? I had protected my son, but I had also destroyed the world he thought he knew. If Heather's father was arrested, if the media got involved, it would ruin everything. I couldn't undo what I had set in motion. I kept thinking about Thomas. I kept seeing his face, the hurt, the anger, the disappointment. He had made his decision. He had wanted to marry Heather, and now he might never forgive me for what I had done. The consequences were clear. I wasn't just facing the loss of my son's trustee, was facing the possibility of never having him in my life again. The next morning, I dressed in a hurry, preparing myself for what I knew would be the hardest day of my life. I tried to reach Thomas one last time, but his phone went straight to voicemail. I had no idea what was going through his mind, but I had a sinking feeling that I wouldn't be welcome at the wedding. Even if the authorities hadn't stepped in, there was no way he'd ever forgive me for how I'd exposed everything. I arrived at the wedding venue, a large, elegant ballroom downtown. It was the kind of place where dreams were made or shattered. I stood outside, feeling like an intruder in a world I no longer belonged to, but I was determined to be there, to see the truth unfold, to witness the consequences of my actions. As I walked through the entrance, I spotted a few familiar faces, Thomas's friends, his colleagues, but none of them made eye contact. I was already being ostracized. The whispers began as soon as I entered the room, people gossiping in hushed tones. They knew why I was there. They knew I had caused this disruption. I didn't care though. I had to stay, even if it meant facing the worst kind of rejection. The ceremony was set to begin in an hour. The guests were arriving in waves, dressed in their finest clothes, unaware of the storm that was about to hit them. I took a seat at the back of the room, trying to blend in, but my mind was racing. What would happen when Thomas learned the truth? Would he still marry her? Would he understand why I had done this, or would he resent me for the rest of his life? And then, as the clock ticked closer to the ceremony, I saw him, Thomas, standing at the front of the room, his back stiff, his expression closed off. He looked out of place, like a man trapped in a situation he didn't want to be in. And when his eyes finally met mine, I saw the pain in them. He didn't look angry, not at first, but I could see the hurt there, the confusion, and something else I couldn't quite read. I stood up to approach him, but before I could take a step, the doors at the back of the room opened, and there she was, the woman my son had chosen to marry, the woman who had come to represent everything I feared for him. Her beauty struck me, but it wasn't the same as before. Now, it felt like a mask, a perfect image hiding something far darker. She smiled, her eyes bright with anticipation, but I could see the tension in her posture, the way she was avoiding everyone's gaze. I knew she was just as trapped in this as Thomas was, but that didn't make it right. She had lied to him, and now he was about to walk into a life that was nothing like the one he imagined. The music began to play, soft and soothing, and the room fell silent as Heather walked down the aisle, her father's dark legacy looming behind her. But before she could reach the altar, the doors at the back of the room opened again, this time with more force. And with that force came the last thing I ever expected to hear, the sound of sirens. The police stormed into the ballroom, their uniforms a stark contrast to the tuxedos and gowns. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Heather's face went pale, and Thomas turned sharply to see what was happening. The whispers in the crowd grew louder as the officers moved forward, surrounding the couple and cutting off any escape. Thomas Weber, one of the officers, said, his voice loud enough for the entire room to hear, "We need you to come with us." "What is this?" Thomas asked, his voice filled with disbelief. He looked at me, his eyes wide, the hurt now replaced with confusion. "Dad, what's going on? What have you done?" "I didn't do anything," I said, my voice steady, though my heart was breaking. "They're here because of her father, because of what he's done. Thomas, you don't understand. Heather's father is wanted by the authorities. This wedding, this entire thing is built on a lie." Heather took a step back, her hands trembling. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "This is a mistake." "This is," "Ma'am," another officer interrupted. "We have enough evidence to place Vince Harrington at the scene of several criminal activities, including money laundering and fraud. We need to ask you some questions, and we're going to need you to come with us." For a moment, the room was dead silent. Thomas was still staring at me, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. The wedding guests, all of them, were watching in stunned silence. And Heather, she stood frozen, like a deer caught in the headlights, her life shattering around her. "Thomas," I said softly, stepping toward him, "I didn't want this. I never wanted to hurt you, but you need to know the truth. You need to understand the danger you're in." But Thomas didn't move. His gaze was locked on Heather, his heart clearly torn. He took a step back, shaking his head. "I can't believe this. I can't believe you did this to me, Dad." The officers approached Heather, gently but firmly, guiding her toward the exit, and for the first time, I saw her break. The facade of control she had kept so carefully in place slipped away, and her face contorted with fear. The woman who had once seemed so perfect was now exposed, vulnerable, and afraid, as the doors closed behind her. I turned to face my son. The silence in the room was deafening, but the words I had been waiting to say for so long seemed to get stuck in my throat. I had saved him, but at what cost? "Thomas," I said, my voice breaking, "I did this for you." But he was already turning away, walking toward the exit, leaving me standing in the middle of the room, with only the echoes of the past and the bitter taste of betrayal in my mouth. The days after the wedding debacle felt like a fog. The shock of the events still lingered in the air, and I could barely bring myself to step outside. I had done what I thought was right. I had exposed the truth, even if it meant shattering everything in the process. But now that it was done, I wasn't sure what to feel anymore. The quiet of the house was suffocating. Thomas didn't speak to me for days. His anger was palpable, a thick wall that kept us separated. Every time I tried to reach out, he ignored my calls, never responded to my messages. The guilt I had tried to suppress crept back in, and I began to wonder if I had made the right choice. Was protecting him worth the pain I had caused? Was there any way to repair the damage I had done? But one evening, as I sat in my living room staring at the blank TV screen, my phone rang. I glanced at the caller ID. It was Thomas. My heart skipped a beat. I answered, my voice unsteady. "Thomas." "Dad," he said quietly, his voice strained. "We need to talk." For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of hope, but I also knew that the conversation was going to be difficult. It wasn't going to be easy to heal what had been broken. Still, I took a deep breath and prepared myself for whatever was coming. We met the next morning at a cafe, a neutral place where we could talk without the pressure of home weighing on us. When I saw him, sitting at a corner table, his posture rigid, I felt a lump in my throat. He looked older, somehow, as though the events of the past week had aged him beyond his years. I sat down across from him, unsure of what to say. We both just stared at each other for a moment, the awkwardness thick in the air. "I'm sorry," I said finally, my voice hoarse. "I never wanted to hurt you. I thought I was protecting you. I was just so scared. Thomas, I didn't want you to get caught up in something that would ruin your life." He looked away, his gaze distant. "You think you were protecting me by ruining everything?" I winced, the words hitting harder than I'd expected. "I never wanted to ruin anything, but when I found out what Heather's family was involved in, I couldn't just let you walk into that without knowing the truth. You deserved to know what was happening, what you were marrying into." Thomas's jaw tightened, and for a moment, he said nothing. I could see the conflict in his eyes, the battle between his love for Heather and the betrayal he felt. It was clear now that, despite everything, he had never fully understood the gravity of the situation until it was too late. "I know you were trying to protect me," he said, his voice softening a little. "But you didn't trust me, Dad. You didn't trust that I could make my own decisions, that I could handle the truth." "I trust you more than you think," I replied, my voice thick with emotion. "But I've been your father for your whole life, and sometimes, when you love someone, you make decisions for them that you think are right. You protect them, even when they don't want you to." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and for the first time since everything had happened, I saw something other than anger in his eyes, a flicker of understanding. "I was angry, Dad. I still am, in some ways, but I get it now. I was blind to what was happening around me. I didn't see how deep this went, and I'm sorry I didn't listen to you." The weight of his words hung between us, and for the first time in days, I felt a sense of relief. He wasn't going to forgive me right away, but there was hope. He was still my son, and I was still his father. "I just want what's best for you," I said quietly. "You've got your whole life ahead of you. I didn't want you to be ruined by someone else's mistakes. I know I made the wrong call in how I went about it, but I couldn't just sit back and watch it all fall apart. Thomas nodded slowly, his fingers tracing the rim of his coffee cup. I know, Dad, I do, and I'll always be grateful for that, but I had to learn it on my own, too. I needed to see for myself that this wasn't the life I wanted. Heather, she's not the person I thought she was, and now I have to figure out what comes next. I sat back, the weight of the past few days beginning to lift. It wasn't over, but maybe it never would be. There would be scars, there would be awkward silences, and there would be questions that we both had to work through. But for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace. I'll always be here for you, Thomas, I said, my voice steady. No matter what. He smiled, though it was a small smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes, but it was a start. I know, and I'll figure things out. It might take time, but I'll get there. We sat in silence for a few moments, both of us lost in thought. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I also knew that, at least for now, we had a chance to rebuild. We weren't where we used to be, but maybe, in time, we could get back there. As we stood to leave, I clapped him on the shoulder. I'm proud of you, Thomas, I said softly. You're stronger than you know. He gave me a small nod, the tension in his shoulders easing just a bit. Thanks, Dad, I'm proud of you too. As he walked out of the cafe, I felt a sense of closure, bittersweet though it was. The battle had been hard, and the consequences were painful, but I had done what I thought was right. In the end, the truth had come out, and though it had shattered everything in its path, it had also cleared the way for something better. Sometimes, the hardest choices lead to the most profound changes, and while my son and I had a long road ahead of us, I knew one thing for certain: we would walk it together. Author's note: this story is a reflection on the complex nature of family and the difficult decisions we sometimes must make in the name of love. While the protagonist's actions were extreme, they came from a place of deep care, and ultimately, the truth was what brought the family closer, even if it meant enduring pain and loss along the way. The moral here is that love, however flawed in its execution, always has the potential to heal, even if the path to that healing is filled with hardship.